Embers in the storm. The rain slashed against the hospital windows like thrown daggers as Naomi Foster finished her third consecutive 12-hour shift in the emergency department. Thunder rolled across the sky, vibrating through her tired bones as she changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders when she removed her nurse's cap, dark circles prominent under her hazel eyes. "You sure you don't want to ride, Foster?" Dr. Patterson called as he grabbed his keys. "It's biblical out there." Naomi shook her head with a tired smile. "The walk helps clear my head. After today's chaos, I need it." The ER had been particularly brutal. A 5-car pileup, 2 cardiac arrests, and a child with severe pneumonia all within hours of each other. Naomi's shoulders carried the familiar weight of emotional exhaustion that came with her profession. The 20-minute walk to her modest apartment was her decompression ritual. Rain or shine, your funeral, Patterson shrugged, disappearing into the storm. Naomi pulled her thin raincoat tighter and stepped into the deluge. Within seconds, water seeped through the worn fabric of her coat. The late October wind cut through her like frozen knives, but she pressed forward, head down against the tempest. Streetlights created hazy halos in the downpour, barely illuminating the deserted sidewalks of Westbridge. 3 blocks from the hospital, she passed the abandoned railway station, a relic from more prosperous times when the steel industry still fueled the town's economy. The old Victorian structure loomed like a ghost ship in the darkness, its broken windows and crumbling facade a testament to forgotten glory. A flash of lightning illuminated something unusual. A figure huddled against the station's entrance, partially sheltered by the decaying overhang. Naomi hesitated. Working in the ER had taught her caution around strangers, especially in isolated areas. Yet something about the stillness of the figure triggered her medical instincts. Drawing a deep breath, she changed course. As she approached, she could make out a man in his late 40s, perhaps older. It was difficult to tell beneath the soaked military-style jacket and unkempt beard. His posture was dignified despite his circumstances, knees drawn to his chest, eyes forward and unflinching against the elements. "You'll catch your death out here," Naomi said, raising her voice above the storm. The man's eyes flicked toward her, startlingly clear blue against weathered skin, then away again. "I've weathered worse." His voice carried unexpected depth and articulation, not slurred or agitated, but measured and calm despite his trembling hands. "I'm Naomi. I work at St. Catherine's." She gestured toward the hospital. "There's a shelter 3 blocks east that's open tonight. They're full. 23 veterans seeking beds, and I arrived last." He stated it as fact without complaint. "I'm Marcus, by the way," Naomi frowned. She knew the shelter's capacity issues well. The opioid crisis and housing shortage had overwhelmed Westbridge's limited resources. The man's jacket bore faded military patches, confirming his implication. "When did you last eat, Marcus?" He considered this question with surprising seriousness. "Tuesday, I believe. Perhaps Wednesday morning." It was Friday night. Naomi made a decision that defied conventional wisdom but aligned perfectly with her heart. "There's a diner around the corner. I was heading there anyway." A small lie. "Join me." Suspicion flickered across Marcus's face. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've had a day where everything went wrong, and I could use some company that isn't bleeding or coding," she answered honestly. "And because you look like you could use something warm." He studied her face for signs of mockery or ulterior motives, but found only sincere exhaustion and compassion. After a long pause, he gathered a small canvas bag, his only possession, and stood with unexpected grace. Laid the way, thin. At Rosie's diner, the overnight waitress, Bethany, raised an eyebrow at Naomi's companion but said nothing. The warmth inside hit Naomi like a physical embrace. They settled into a corner booth, Marcus positioning himself to see all exits, a habit Naomi recognized from treating veterans with PTSD. "Order whatever you want," she said, sliding the laminated menu across the table. "The meatloaf is surprisingly decent." Marcus handled the menu carefully as though it were a valuable artifact. "I don't require charity." "It's not charity. It's dinner," Naomi countered, "and maybe a little karma. I believe in putting good things into the world when everything else feels broken." Something in her words reached him. He nodded once decisively, and when Bethany returned, ordered the meatloaf special with quiet dignity. As rain continued its assault outside, they formed an unlikely connection. the exhausted nurse and the homeless veteran, finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence amid the storm. Neither could have imagined how this simple meal, born of compassion and circumstance, would irrevocably alter the course of both their lives. The bridge between worlds over the next 3 weeks. Naomi found herself looking for Marcus during her walks home. Their initial meeting had evolved into a curious routine. Twice weekly, she would spot him near the abandoned railway station, and they would share a meal at Rosie's diner. At first, she told herself it was professional concern. As a nurse, she noticed the persistent cough that rattled his chest and the slight limp when the weather turned colder. But honesty eventually prevailed. Naomi enjoyed his company. Unlike her colleagues who discussed hospital politics or her few friends who were busy with families, Marcus listened with rare attentiveness. He asked thoughtful questions about her patients without requiring names or details, seeming to understand the ethical boundaries of her work instinctively. "You've never mentioned where you served," Naomi said one evening, as they shared a slice of Rosie's famous blueberry pie. November had brought an early frost to Westbridge, painting the windows with delicate crystalline patterns. Marcus methodically cut a small piece of pie before answering. "Mostly classified operations, 15 years across various theaters. Afghanistan, Iraq, a few places not on civilian maps." "Is that why you don't go to the VA?" she asked, noticing how he slightly tensed at the question. "The VA and I have philosophical differences about treatment approaches," he replied with a hint of wry humor. Some wounds don't fit neatly into diagnostic categories, Naomi understood. She'd seen enough veterans pass through her ER to recognize the gaps in the system. "Well, as your unofficial healthcare provider, I'm professionally obligated to tell you that sleeping outdoors with that cough is medical idiocy." For the first time since they'd met, Marcus laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his weathered face. "Duly noted, Nurse Foster." The following day, Naomi stopped by the hospital's resource center and collected information on veteran housing programs. She arrived at their usual meeting spot with a folder of options and a determination that surprised even herself. "I have a proposition," she announced without preamble. "My apartment building has a vacant unit on the first floor. It's barely more than a studio, but the landlord owes me a favor after I helped his mother through pneumonia last winter." Marcus's expression remained impassive. "Naomi, it's temporary," she interrupted. "Just through winter. The rent is covered for 2 months through a veterans emergency housing grant I found. After that, you can figure out next steps." He studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Why are you doing this?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Naomi thought about the emptiness of her apartment since her fiancé Thomas had ended their engagement last spring. She thought about the patients she couldn't save, the constant giving of herself to strangers in crisis. Perhaps helping Marcus was selfish in its own way, a concrete good she could do outside the controlled chaos of the ER. "Because sometimes people need a foothold, not a handout," she finally answered. "And winter in Westbridge kills people every year." After a long silence, Marcus nodded once. 2 months. Then I find my own way. The apartment was everything Naomi had described, small, sparsely furnished, but clean and warm. Marcus stood in the center of the main room, his canvas bag and 2 plastic shopping bags containing his worldly possessions, looking pitiful against the empty space. "The shower works better than it looks," Naomi explained, pointing toward the bathroom. "Hot water takes exactly 53 seconds to reach the 3rd floor, but only 19 seconds down here." "You've timed it," Marcus observed with the ghost of a smile. "Nurses are precise people." She set a bag of groceries on the counter, basics to get you through a few days. "My number is on the fridge if you need anything." As she turned to leave, Marcus cleared his throat. "Naomi." He seemed to struggle with words, unusual for someone typically so articulate. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "Then don't say it," she replied simply. "Just get better." Their dynamic shifted after Marcus moved into the apartment. He remained intensely private but began to reveal fragments of himself. He was educated. That much was obvious from his vocabulary and references to literature Naomi had never read. He had a talent for fixing things, repairing her perpetually jammed kitchen window with nothing but a butter knife and inexplicable expertise. Meanwhile, Naomi's life continued its demanding pace. The hospital faced budget cuts, forcing longer shifts with fewer staff. 3 nights before Christmas, she arrived home at 2 a.m. after an 18-hour shift to find her apartment freezing. The building's ancient heating system had failed again. Too exhausted to care, she collapsed onto her couch still wearing her coat, only to be awakened an hour later by a knock at her door. Marcus stood in the hallway looking almost unrecognizable. He had trimmed his beard, and his hair was cut short in a style that hinted at military precision. Most surprising was his attire, clean jeans and a flannel shirt that actually fit, rather than the oversized donated clothes from the shelter. "Your radiator's broken," he stated. "Building superintendent won't be back until after Christmas," Naomi mumbled, still half asleep. "It's fine. I'll use space heaters." "I can fix it," he said with quiet confidence. "I noticed the maintenance room is unlocked. The system just needs bleeding and the pressure valve adjusted." Too tired to argue, Naomi handed him her spare key. "Knock yourself out, Bob Vila." She woke hours later to blessed warmth and the smell of coffee. In her kitchen, she found Marcus at her small table, a schematic drawing of the building's heating system, sketched on a notepad with remarkable technical detail. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. He closed the notebook casually. "Military Engineering Corps. Keeping bases operational in hostile environments teaches versatility." Something about his explanation felt rehearsed, but Naomi was too grateful for the heat to question it. Instead, she noticed the newspaper on the counter, folded open to job listings with several circled in red. "Security consultant positions," he explained, following her gaze. "I have interviews next week." Pride warmed Naomi more than the repaired radiator. "That's fantastic, Marcus." As Christmas approached, the ER became a revolving door of holiday accidents, alcohol poisoning, and seasonal depression. Naomi worked through Christmas Eve, treating everything from a Santa with a dislocated shoulder to a child who had swallowed part of a toy drone. She trudged home at midnight, expecting another solitary holiday. Instead, she found a small package outside her door with a note in Marcus's precise handwriting. "For the bridge builder. Merry Christmas." Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a simple bridge design spanning a small blue stone. Not expensive, but thoughtfully chosen. The accompanying card read, "Some people build walls. Others build bridges. Thank you for being the latter." Standing in her hallway, pendant in hand, Naomi realized their connection had become something she hadn't anticipated. A friendship that defied explanation, yet felt increasingly essential to her life. What she couldn't know was that Marcus was not who he claimed to be, and that the bridge between their worlds was built on foundations far more complex than either could imagine. Shadows of the past, Julian Blackwood stared at his reflection in the apartment's small bathroom mirror. The man looking back at him with his neatly trimmed beard and intelligent eyes was slowly erasing Marcus, the identity he had cultivated for nearly 7 months. He ran his hand over his face, contemplating how easily people saw what they expected to see. 6 months ago, he had been sitting in his penthouse office at Blackwood Technologies, signing papers for the company's latest acquisition, a $4.2 billion deal that would revolutionize accessible healthcare technology. That same evening, he discovered his brother Richard and the board had been systematically diverting funds from the company's charitable foundation to offshore accounts. Using Julian's philanthropy initiatives as cover, the betrayal had been absolute. Richard, his only family since their parents' death, had orchestrated everything, including plans to frame Julian if the scheme was discovered. The evidence Julian gathered was damning, but would destroy not only his brother but potentially the company their father had built, and with it, the livelihood of thousands of employees. So Julian had made a decision. He'd secured the evidence, created airtight protections for the foundation's remaining assets, and then simply disappeared. Not to flee, but to think, to understand the world his technology supposedly served, but that he had become increasingly disconnected from. His homeless veteran persona wasn't randomly chosen. Julian had indeed served in military intelligence before inheriting the company, one of the few facts about Marcus that wasn't fabricated. The disguise allowed him to observe society's margins while he decided what to do about Richard's betrayal. What he hadn't counted on was Naomi Foster. Julian checked his secure phone, the one Marcus kept hidden in his canvas bag. 3 missed calls from his loyal assistant, Bennett, the only person who knew his true whereabouts. A text message read, "Richard moving assets again. Board meeting called for February 10th. Decision timeline accelerating." He had less than a month before he needed to return and confront what awaited him at Blackwood Technologies. The thought filled him with unexpected reluctance. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "It's unlocked," he called, quickly tucking the phone away. Naomi entered, carrying a bag from the local pharmacy. January had brought a brutal cold snap to Westbridge, and the hospital was overflowing with influenza cases. "I brought reinforcements," she announced, pulling out cough syrup and decongestants. "Half the hospital staff is down with this flu. You're getting preventative measures whether you like it or not." Julian smiled, automatically falling back into his Marcus persona. "Yes, ma'am." As she arranged the medications on his counter, Julian noticed the silver bridge pendant hanging around her neck. She'd worn it every day since Christmas, a fact that gave him a curious satisfaction. "I got the security job at Westbridge Community College," he told her. "Swing shift supervisor starting next week." Naomi's face lit up. "That's wonderful. We should celebrate." "Already planned," Julian replied. "Dinner tomorrow?" "Not Rosie's this time. There's that Italian place on 4th Street. Salvatore's? Fancy." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me on an actual date, Marcus?" The question caught him off guard. Their relationship had evolved into something undefined, more than friendship but carefully restrained on both sides. Julian had told himself the boundaries were necessary given his temporary identity, but the truth was more complicated. "I believe I am," he answered carefully, "if that's something you'd be interested in." Her smile was worth every moment of his complicated deception. "I would." The following evening, Julian chose his attire carefully, nice enough to honor the occasion, but not so nice as to raise questions about how a newly employed security guard could afford designer clothes. He opted for the one dress shirt Marcus might reasonably own, paired with his least weathered pants. Salvatore's was modest by Julian's standards, but he could see Naomi considered it special as she arrived in a simple green dress that complemented her auburn hair. For a precious few hours he allowed himself to simply be a man enjoying dinner with a woman he admired. The complexities of his dual identity temporarily set aside. "You never talk about before," Naomi said over dessert, a shared tiramisu that she insisted was too decadent for one person. "Before? Before I found you at the train station. Before whatever happened that put you there." Julian had prepared extensively for such questions, crafting a backstory for Marcus that was detailed enough to be believable but vague enough to avoid verification. "Not much to tell," he deflected. "Military, then private security overseas. Came back to find the country had moved on without me. Had some rough patches, made some bad decisions. And your family," she pressed gently, "gone." That at least wasn't a lie regarding his parents, though it omitted Richard entirely. "It's just me." Naomi reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Not anymore." The simple gesture and words struck Julian with unexpected force. For a man who commanded a corporate empire worth billions, who routinely made decisions affecting thousands of lives, he found himself utterly disarmed by one nurse's compassion. As they walked back toward their apartment building, snow began to fall in large, lazy flakes illuminated by the streetlights. Julian noticed Naomi shivering despite her coat and, without thinking, put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him naturally as though they had walked this way 100 times before. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For dinner? It was my pleasure. For making me feel seen again." Her voice grew quieter. "After Thomas left, I threw myself into work. It was easier than admitting how invisible I felt." Julian tightened his arm around her. "Anyone who could overlook you needs serious medical attention." Outside her apartment door, the moment Julian had both anticipated and dreaded arrived. Naomi looked up at him, her expression open and expectant. All his carefully constructed walls and justifications crumbled as he leaned down to kiss her, gently at first, then with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, Naomi's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "Would you like to come in?" Every rational part of Julian's mind screamed that he should decline, that he was already in too deep, that any further intimacy would only make the inevitable revelation more painful. But for once, rationality lost to something more primal and urgent, the need to be known, truly known by another person. "Yes," he said simply. Later, as Naomi slept beside him, Julian stared at the ceiling, the weight of his deception crushing against his chest. He had crossed a line, one that transformed his carefully calculated experiment into something messy and human and real. In less than a month, he would have to return to his real life and confront his brother. There was no scenario in which Marcus could simply continue existing. His secure phone vibrated with a text. Carefully extracting himself from bed, Julian retrieved it from his discarded pants. Bennett's message was brief but alarming. Richard expediting board vote. February 1st, he knows you're alive. Julian felt the carefully constructed walls of his double life beginning to crumble. His time in Westbridge, his time with Naomi, was running out faster than he had anticipated. As if sensing his turmoil, Naomi stirred. "Everything okay?" she murmured sleepily. He returned to bed, drawing her close. "Just work. Go back to sleep." As she nestled against him, Julian made a decision. He would tell her everything: who he was, why he had disappeared, what he was facing. She deserved the truth even if it meant losing her, but fate had other plans. The following morning, Julian woke to find Naomi already dressed for her shift, sitting on the edge of the bed with his secure phone in her hand. On the screen was a news alert. Blackwood heir still missing, brother Richard seeks control of tech empire. Next to the headline was a corporate photograph of Julian from the previous year, clean-shaven, hair perfectly styled, dressed in a bespoke suit worth more than everything in his current apartment combined. "Who are you?" Naomi whispered, her voice breaking. "Who are you, really?" Julian Blackwood, not Marcus, sat up slowly, the last fragments of his carefully constructed identity falling away like autumn leaves. "I can explain." But the hurt in her eyes told him some explanations might come too late. Unveiled truths. The silence in Naomi's apartment stretched between them like an abyss. Outside, the January morning painted Westbridge in wintry half-light, casting long shadows across the floor where Julian sat in an armchair, facing Naomi on the couch. Her posture was rigid, arms crossed protectively over her chest, the bridge pendant conspicuously absent from her neck. "So every word was a lie," she finally said, her voice unnervingly steady. "The veteran story, the homelessness, the struggling to find work." Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Not everything. My military service was real, though not as recent as I implied. And I was genuinely without a home when you found me, just by choice rather than circumstance." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Oh, that makes it better. You were playing poverty tourist while people actually struggle every day." The accusation stung because it carried an element of truth. Julian had begun his experiment with intellectual curiosity rather than true understanding. "That's not entirely fair," he said carefully. "My intentions, your intentions." Naomi interrupted, color rising in her cheeks. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to find that photo? To realize the man I've been," she faltered, "caring about doesn't actually exist?" Julian stood and moved toward the window, needing distance from the hurt in her eyes. Outside, people hurried through the cold, their breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Normal people with uncomplicated lives. I never expected you," he said quietly. "You weren't part of the plan." "And what exactly was the plan, Julian?" His real name sounded foreign coming from her lips. "Slum it with the working class for kicks before returning to your penthouse?" He turned back to her, frustration flaring. "My brother and several board members have been embezzling millions from my company's charitable foundation. Money meant for affordable healthcare technology in underserved communities. When I discovered it, I had two choices: expose everything immediately and potentially destroy the company my father built, along with thousands of jobs, or step back and find a strategic approach. So you decided to play homeless instead of, I don't know, calling the FBI?" Naomi's skepticism was palpable. "The situation is more complicated than that. Richard has political connections that would make legal channels challenging, and I needed perspective." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "The foundation was my passion project. I thought I understood the communities we served, but I realized I had no real concept of genuine struggle. So I was your case study in genuine struggle." Her voice had gone dangerously quiet. "No." Julian moved toward her, stopping when she visibly tensed. "You were the unexpected variable. The person who made me question everything I thought I knew about connection and value." Naomi stood abruptly. "I have to get to work. Some of us actually have real jobs with real consequences when we don't show up." Naomi, please. I don't even know what to call you anymore. She grabbed her coat and bag. I need time to process this, whatever this is. Don't follow me. The door closed behind her with definitive finality, leaving Julian alone with the wreckage of his deception. He returned to his apartment and made the call he'd been postponing. It's time, Bennett. Prepare the documents. I'm coming back. 3 days passed without a word from Naomi. Julian respected her request for space, though twice he nearly knocked on her door. Instead, he focused on preparations for his return to Blackwood Technologies. Bennett had arranged for a private car to collect him the following morning. As Julian packed his few belongings, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Bethany, the night waitress from Rosie's diner. She's not doing well, Bethany said without preamble. Thought you should know. Julian's chest tightened. What happened? Collapsed during her shift yesterday. Exhaustion and dehydration, they said. She's been working doubles since. Bethany left the implication hanging. Anyway, they admitted her to observation. Room 418. After Bethany left, Julian sat on the edge of his bed, weighing his options. The car would arrive at 8 a.m. His presence would likely be the last thing Naomi wanted, but he couldn't leave without seeing her one final time. St. Catherine's Hospital felt different as a visitor, rather than an occasional topic in Naomi's stories. Julian navigated the sterile corridors until he found room 418, hesitating outside the partially open door. Through the gap, he could see Naomi asleep, an IV attached to her arm, her auburn hair spread across the institutional pillow. She looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, so different from the capable nurse who had commanded his respect from their first meeting. As Julian debated whether to enter, a doctor approached the room. Are you family? She asked, eyeing him with professional detachment. Friend? Julian replied, suddenly aware he wasn't sure that was even true anymore. How is she? Physically, she'll be fine. Classic burnout pattern. Too many shifts, not enough self-care. The doctor checked her tablet. Foster's one of our best nurses. Stubborn as hell, though. Julian smiled despite himself. That she is. She's been asking about her shifts, the doctor continued. Maybe you can talk some sense into her about taking the mandated rest period. Before Julian could respond, a weak voice called from inside the room. I can hear you both, you know. The doctor gave him a sympathetic glance before entering. Julian remained in the hallway, listening to their brief exchange about discharge instructions and mandatory time off. When the doctor emerged, she nodded toward the door, giving Julian tacit permission to enter. Naomi was sitting up now, the hospital bed inclined. Her complexion was pale, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. Bethany has a big mouth, she said by way of greeting. Julian approached cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance from the bed. She cares about you, as do a lot of people. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. I'm leaving tomorrow, Julian finally said. I have to address the situation with my brother before the board vote. Naomi nodded, her expression unreadable. Back to your real life. I wanted to explain everything properly. To apologize. He placed a manila envelope on the bedside table. Inside is the truth, all of it. My contact information, documentation about the foundation. What happened with Richard. I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I couldn't leave without giving you this. She stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. You know what hurts the most? Not the lies about your circumstances. It's that I thought... She paused, swallowing hard. I thought what we had was real. That for once someone saw me, really saw me, and valued that. I did see you, Julian insisted, moving closer. Everything between us was real, Naomi. My background, my resources, those were the fabrications. Not my feelings for you. How can I possibly believe that? Her voice cracked slightly. The billionaire and the nurse? It sounds like a bad Lifetime movie. You didn't fall for a billionaire, Julian countered. You fell for a homeless veteran with a persistent cough and terrible fashion sense. A man who fixed your radiator and appreciated blueberry pie and saw how extraordinary you are when you thought no one was looking. A tear slipped down Naomi's cheek. And that man doesn't exist. He does. Julian risked sitting on the edge of the bed. He's the most real part of me. The part I'd forgotten until you reminded me what actually matters. Naomi looked away, but not before Julian caught the conflict in her expression. I need time. I understand. He stood, respecting her unspoken request for space. My private number is in the envelope. I'll be busy with the board situation for the next few weeks, but I'll always answer if you call. At the doorway, Julian paused. For what it's worth, I never expected to find someone like you in Westbridge. Someone who changed everything without even trying. He didn't wait for a response, knowing none was forthcoming. As he walked through the hospital corridors for the last time, Julian felt a strange sense of completion. Tomorrow he would return to Blackwood Technologies, to the life and responsibilities he had temporarily set aside. He would face his brother and the board with renewed purpose, fighting not just for his company, but for the Foundation's mission that Naomi had helped him truly understand. Whether she ever forgave him, whether she ever called, Julian knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was no longer the same man who had disappeared 7 months ago. For better or worse, Naomi Foster had irrevocably changed him, just as the storm that had brought them together had changed the course of both their lives. Beyond appearances, 6 weeks later, spring arrived in Westbridge like a hesitant visitor, tentatively warming the air and coaxing stubborn crocuses through the thawing ground. Outside St. Catherine's Hospital, Naomi sat on a bench during her lunch break, absently turning her phone over in her hands as she had countless times since being discharged. The manila envelope Julian had left rested in her apartment, its contents thoroughly examined during her mandatory 2-week recovery period. The documentation revealed a story more complex than she had imagined. Evidence of Richard Blackwood's systematic embezzlement, Julian's attempts to secure the Foundation's remaining assets, and his gradual realization that his disconnection from reality had made him vulnerable to exploitation. Most surprising were the handwritten journals Julian's daily reflections during his time as Marcus. His initial entries were clinical, almost anthropological observations about life on society's margins. But as weeks progressed, the tone shifted. Entries about Naomi evolved from observations to genuine admiration, culminating in confused reflections about feelings he hadn't anticipated. The business news had covered the dramatic events at Blackwood Technologies extensively. Julian had returned spectacularly, presenting irrefutable evidence of his brother's misdeeds at an emergency board meeting. Richard faced criminal charges, while Julian had emerged with his leadership position strengthened and a new direction for the company announced, focusing primarily on healthcare technology accessibility rather than profit maximization. Her phone vibrated with a text from Dr. Patterson. Emergency department meeting in 10. New partnership announcement. Sighing, Naomi pocketed her phone and headed back inside. The hospital administration had been unusually secretive lately, with rumors of major changes circulating among the staff. The conference room was already crowded when Naomi slipped in, finding a spot against the wall. Hospital Director Whitman stood at the front, alongside 2 unfamiliar executives in business attire. As you all know, Whitman began, St. Catherine's has been struggling financially for years. Today, I'm pleased to announce a partnership that will transform our ability to serve this community. He gestured to the screen behind him, where the Blackwood Technologies logo appeared alongside St. Catherine's emblem. Blackwood's healthcare division has selected our hospital as the pilot site for their new integrated medical technology system. This represents a $15 million investment in St. Catherine's, including a complete overhaul of our emergency department. Murmurs rippled through the room. Naomi felt her heart rate accelerate as Whitman continued. This partnership includes funding for additional nursing staff, technological upgrades, and a revolutionary patient-centered communication system. The program director will be here next week to begin implementation planning. As the presentation continued, Naomi slipped out of the room, needing air. In the quiet corridor, she leaned against the wall, processing the implications. Was this Julian's way of reaching out? Or merely coincidence, a business decision that had nothing to do with her? The answer came 3 days later when Naomi arrived for her shift to find an unfamiliar woman, waiting by the nurse's station. Nurse Foster? The woman extended her hand. Grace Wong, Blackwood Healthcare Technologies. I'm the implementation director for the new system. Naomi shook her hand cautiously. Nice to meet you. I've been instructed to give you this personally. Grace handed her a sealed envelope, and to tell you that the choice is entirely yours. No pressure, no obligations. The envelope contained a single card with an address in the city's renovated waterfront district and a time, 7 p.m. That evening, curiosity warred with lingering hurt as Naomi debated throughout her shift whether to go. By evening, curiosity had won. She changed into a simple blue dress and took a rideshare to the address, a converted warehouse overlooking the river, now home to an upscale community innovation center. A security guard directed her to the rooftop garden. As elevator doors opened, Naomi gasped softly. The entire rooftop had been transformed into a replica of Rosie's diner, down to the worn vinyl booths and vintage jukebox, but open to the sky, where stars were just beginning to appear. Julian stood beside the central booth, hands in his pockets. Gone was any trace of Marcus, replaced by a man whose confident bearing suggested comfort with his identity. Yet his expression held the same vulnerability she had glimpsed that rainy night at the train station. "You came," he said simply. "I almost didn't." Naomi remained by the elevator. The hospital partnership, was that about me? Julian shook his head. "St. Catherine's was already on our short list for the pilot program. Your connection to it accelerated the decision but didn't create it. The Foundation's purpose has always been healthcare accessibility." He gestured to the recreated diner. "This, however, is absolutely about you." Despite herself, Naomi moved closer, taking in the meticulous details. "How did you even remember everything?" "I remember every moment with you," Julian said quietly. "Every conversation, every look, even the exact shade of blue in that dress you're wearing." Naomi approached the booth, their booth, and sat down. After a moment's hesitation, Julian joined her. "I read everything in the envelope," she said. "I understand better now why you did what you did, but understanding isn't the same as forgiveness." Julian nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness, Naomi. I just wanted an opportunity to tell you face to face that these past weeks have clarified something for me." He reached across the table, stopping short of touching her hand. "I spent my entire life building walls between myself and the world, between my work and my humanity. Then you offered an umbrella to a stranger in the rain, and those walls began to crumble." "Julian, please let me finish." His eyes held an intensity that silenced her. "I returned to Blackwood Technologies as a different man. The company is being restructured around the Foundation's mission, with half our profits directed to healthcare initiatives for underserved communities. I've established residency here in Westbridge to oversee the St. Catherine's project personally." Naomi's eyebrows rose. "You're moving here? What about your life in New York?" "My life is where I choose to build it." Julian finally reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed the contact. "I'm not asking you to forget the deception or to pick up where we left off. I'm asking for the chance to start again, honestly this time, to build something real if you're willing." From a nearby speaker, the opening notes of "Stand By Me" began to play, the song that had been on Rosie's jukebox the first night they'd shared a meal. "You remembered the song," Naomi said softly. "I remember everything," Julian repeated, "including how it felt to be seen as just a man, not a fortune or a position. You gave me that gift. I'd like the opportunity to earn it legitimately." Naomi studied him, searching for any trace of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, she found only the same clear gaze that had first caught her attention during that stormy night. The eyes of someone who, despite everything, she had come to know better than perhaps anyone else. "I don't know if I can trust this," she admitted. "It feels too cinematic. The billionaire and the nurse, the grand gesture." "Then we start small," Julian suggested. "Coffee, conversations, no grand gestures, no recreated diners." He glanced around with a self-deprecating smile. "After tonight, anyway." Despite herself, Naomi laughed, a sound that seemed to visibly relieve Julian. "I've missed that sound," he said. Naomi withdrew her hand, but gently. "I need to know one thing. If we try this, whatever this is, am I dating Julian Blackwood, tech billionaire, or the man I met at the train station?" "Neither, both." Julian leaned forward. "I'm still figuring out who I am when all the layers are peeled away. But I know I want to discover that with you if you'll let me." The honesty in his answer resonated with Naomi's own journey of self-discovery since their separation. She had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, how she had used work to avoid intimacy, how she had idealized their connection perhaps as much as he had concealed his identity. "Coffee," she finally said. "We can start with coffee." Real coffee, not on recreated movie sets. Relief washed over Julian's features. Tomorrow? There's a little place near the hospital. I know it, Naomi interrupted with the ghost of a smile. I'll meet you there at noon. As they stood to leave, Julian hesitantly reached into his pocket. I have something that belongs to you. He held out. The silver bridge pendant, the Christmas gift she had, returned to his apartment along with his other belongings after their confrontation. Keep it, she said. For now. Maybe someday it'll make sense again. They left the rooftop separately, Naomi declining Julian's offer of his private car. As her rideshare pulled away, she glanced back to see him standing alone against the city skyline. Neither Marcus, the homeless veteran, nor Julian, the tech magnate, but simply a man hoping for a second chance. The next day, as Naomi approached the coffee shop, she spotted Julian already waiting, dressed in a casual manner that struck a balance between his two identities. When he saw her, his expression brightened with genuine hope. It would take time to rebuild trust, to discover who they were together without secrets between them. The path ahead was uncertain, complicated by their different worlds and the lingering echoes of deception. But as Naomi joined Julian at the table, accepting the coffee he had already ordered exactly how she liked it, she recognized a fundamental truth. Sometimes the most authentic connections form when pretenses fall away, when storms force us to seek shelter together, when kindness is offered without expectation, and when second chances are brave enough to acknowledge both past mistakes and future possibilities. So, she said, meeting his eyes directly, tell me about Julian Blackwood. The real one this time. And as spring sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the space between them, Julian began to share his story. Not from its expected beginning, but from that rainy night at an abandoned train station when a compassionate nurse had offered an umbrella to a stranger and inadvertently changed the course of both their lives. Their journey forward would be written not by wealth or circumstance, but by the authentic connection that had survived deception, betrayal, and the revelation of truth. In that moment, as their conversation flowed with newfound honesty, both Naomi and Julian understood that some bridges, once built, can withstand even the most powerful storms.